Okay, I am joined by Kristi White, VP of Product Management with Knowland, coming to us from Arlington, Texas, right?
Yes, you're right. Very good.
So I'm 4 hours down the road in Houston, couple of Texas pals.
There you go. We're enjoying this lovely, cool fall that we're suddenly getting. At least we are. I don't know
Oh,
about you guys.
oh yeah, yes, it's very nice. It's remarkable. So quickly, tell us about Knowland, in case we have anybody that's not familiar with you guys.
Yeah, so we are that company that comes into your hotel and takes photos of your reader boards, and then we collect that data inside of our platform and we transform it. So it's not just about knowing what meetings occurred at what hotels in your market. We transform that from a business intelligence perspective. So your sales team can go in and say, well, these are the accounts that I should be prospecting to try to find new business because they've stayed in my market, they've stayed at hotels similar to mine, and all of that data is stored where people can search it and understand what's going on, the breadth and the depth of meetings happening in their markets. And that's what we do.
So what's the geographies? Is it just the U.S. all over? What?
So it's all over North America, and we're also very active in Asia Pacific as well. Primarily in the Hong Kong, Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, places like that. We are currently not operating in Europe, but one day we hope to get back into that market. But COVID has done a bit more of a job there, and it just didn't make sense to continue reading right now.
Right. So how are things?
Things are actually getting better, and I feel like I'm this lone voice in the wild saying, guys, it's not as bad as the prognosticators are saying. We're not at full volume by any stretch of imagination, but we're actually up to about 10% of what we used to read. Most markets are having meetings. We're seeing meetings in those markets. Even in the major markets that have been hit the hardest, we're starting to see uptick in there. 180% increase in meetings over the last 60 days. And the really good news in that, Jason, is they're mostly corporate meetings. 63% of them last week were corporate meetings. So that means those are meetings that salespeople can actually get out and target and try to capture. It's not the Smurfy stuff that you sort of happen into because someone called your hotel.
So can you share with us some of the more prosperous geographies?
The major markets, as you would expect, are pretty big up there. New York City has quite a bit. Boston, Chicago, and Atlanta, and Phoenix are the four biggest markets right now. They're also having slightly bigger meetings, but we're also seeing markets like Birmingham, Alabama, that's had an 800% increase in the last 60 days in meetings. Those secondary and tertiary markets, St. Louis, Kansas City, all of these are having meetings on a regular basis. 60% of the meetings that we see are fewer than 50 people, but they are using slightly more square footage. So the average square footage sits at about 2,000 square feet.
So we just had an election yesterday. I
We
mean,
did.
is any of this election related, or is it
Um,
truly corporate business?
It's truly corporate business. We did see over the last 3 weeks some markets where hotels and convention centers were being used for early voting, which skews the size of the meetings because they may take 10,000 square feet of meeting space, but let's be honest, they're probably only going to have 20 or 30 people in there at any given time. And we saw a couple of political rally type things, but that has not been the vast majority of the business that we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of tech companies out having meetings. Amazon, obviously, because they're always hiring, so they're out there. Google is a pretty regular one that comes up, and a lot of pharmaceutical and medical things that we're seeing as well. Another interesting niche that we're seeing, I've kind of noticed this trend over the last few weeks, are accounting firms and law firms where they're choosing to do arbitration and depositions or just meetings in a hotel rather than having them in their office so that they don't have to worry about bringing outsiders into their office. So
Well,
if
in a
someone's looking
hotel,
for a
in
good
a
niche to
hotel,
get into, there you go.
yeah, and a hotel these days is one of the safest places you can be.
Absolutely one of the safest places.
That
So,
and an
we're seeing a
airplane.
lot of that. That in an
Yeah.
airplane. I've been on a bunch of airplanes recently, so yeah.
What types of hotels are these generally?
So one thing that we are saying, the regular mix that you would expect to see full service hotels, but we're also seeing a lot of mid-scale hotels are mid-scale from a size perspective. So in that 2,000 to 6,000 square foot range being used. And I think some of that is the thought that there's probably a safety in lack of numbers. So someone that might have chosen to be at a hotel that had 50,000 square feet before says, well, let's go look at that 2,000 to 6,000 square feet because we may be the only event that's happening. So we're limiting our exposure. So we are sort of seeing this renaissance of this mid-size hotel coming up to the forefront. And I think that's just they feel like they can mitigate the risk a little bit.
Yeah. Are you talking to these hotels? Do you know how they're getting this business?
So I have actually talked to a handful of hotels because every so often something will pop up in the data. I'm like, I got to call and ask about that just because I'm a geek and I'm nosy, let's be honest. But for the most part, our CS team and our sales team have been talking to them, and it's because they're out there asking the question. They've reached out to their key customers and said, hey, I know you're not going to have that annual event, but do you have something smaller that's coming up? One thing that we are hearing anecdotally from meeting planners, because I spend a lot of time talking with meeting planners, is they're no longer putting things out to RFP. They're sourcing a hotel they have a relationship with. And a lot of times it's whoever answers the phone first gets the piece of business because there's so much chaos at hotels with their sales teams right now. So they call, they get a salesperson, you have the data available, here's my credit card, here's my information, let's book this thing. It's a very, very short booking window.
Yeah. Any kind of insight into the next couple of months into the holidays?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that because I actually, on my podcast, had Katie Moreau from Amadeus on yesterday, and they're actually seeing group business pick up. Q2 of next year is the best of the 4 quarters as of this moment in time. But remember, we got like 400 more shopping days until the end of next year. But they're actually seeing about 50% of what was on the books this year already on the books for next year as a contribution to occupancy. And, we're anticipating it's going to get better. I think Q1 and Q2 will be better than we're expecting, probably not as good as we want, but assuming we come through the winter relatively unscathed with no major significant outbreak, I think the latter half of next year is going to be pretty phenomenal from a group perspective. We're already seeing Fortune 500 companies lift their travel bans and let their transient travelers out there. So, my recommendation to hotels is start looking in your local negotiated business, those K&Rs that you have, and see who's booking, who's traveling from a transient perspective, because chances are they're going to be the ones that are back on the group side first. And if you don't have a relationship with those companies, you need to get one today.
So beyond that, with the time remaining, any more advice you have for hoteliers as we continue through this big old fat mess?
So I think it's incumbent upon us. This is a different disruption than anything we've ever experienced. And it's that travelers are intrinsically scared to travel. So as an industry, we need to do our best to show them that it's safe to be back in our hotels. Every hotel out there, you need to have your salespeople out there making phone calls at the very least, making Zoom calls, making those connections. But then every time you have a meeting in your hotel, celebrate the heck out of it. It needs to be on every one of your social sites. Send an email to your key customers that you're talking to that, hey, we just had this meeting just recently. We've actually created an initiative with Knowland called Meetings Are Back. It's a social campaign, and we're encouraging hotels to post meetings, post their reopening stories, and use that hashtag of Meetings Are Back. We're curating that on our page because we as an industry are going to have to show travelers that it's safe to get back out there, planners that it's safe to hold a meeting in our hotels. And that's how we're going to get this industry back, is building that sense of trust.
Okay, some good advice, Kristi. Thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
All right, talk to you soon. Bye.
Thanks. Bye, Jason.